Hey everybody, this is Sasquatchers. Once again, AC here being joined by JC. And today we're going to do things a little bit differently. We're going to try to look a little more professional, so to speak. Tonight we have a really cool guest. His name is James Szubski. And I'm going to give you a brief rundown of him before we bring him in. James is the Chief Operating Officer of Margie's Outdoor Store, located deep within the Columbia River Gorge in Washington State. In 2022, his store initiated a paranormal reporting program, which has now received well over 100 reports of strange activity in the gorge area. James is a former volunteer search and rescue EMT, a wildland firefighter, a mountain guide, and a highly decorated U.S. Army infantry vet. He earned a degree in communications from the Evergreen State College and has enjoyed a decades-long career in that field, working for companies like Wizards of the Coast, the makers of Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering.
Oh, yeah.
That's cool as shit.
Hell yeah.
He currently volunteers his time as the leader of the Klickitat Ape Cat research team. And I did really well up until the ape cat.
Look at that.
Let's go ahead and we'll play the intro and we'll start talking to James.
The truth is out there. Never stop looking. Never be sheep. Always disrupt. We are the ungovernable. We are the truth seekers. We are Sasquatchers.
Woo, studio magic. Look at that.
And now we welcome James. How are you doing?
Hey, James.
James?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on tonight.
Yeah, thanks for being with us. This is
Absolutely.
Really cool. You know, I had your prep in front of me, and I completely didn't see the Wizards of the Coast. I've been playing
that's
D&D.
cool.
I've been playing D&D for over 20 years now. So that's really cool, and it's going to be hard not to sidetrack this and turn this into like Critical Role now.
Well, I will tell you, it was a joy to work for Wizards, and of course, I played D&D growing up. So I've been probably playing for 40 years. In fact, just this weekend, I was playing with my 10-year-old daughter and her friends, and I'm a big fan. And it was kind of a life goal, life achievement, I guess, when we would play D&D in the boardrooms there at Wizards of the Coast. They're pretty well set up for that kind of stuff. And so,
how good are the people that work there? Are they like really good at the game, or are they just like mediocre?
Oh my God, they're ridiculously good. Like, you have no idea how some of the people, especially like the guys that work on Magic the Gathering, they are literal like rocket scientists. Like that was they were astrophysicists before they came to work for Wizards of the Coast.
Wow.
And the amount of math and just sheer brain power of that crew is it's humbling. I'll just say that.
Well, I'm sure.
And super creative, really genuine and good people. It was a very fun memories of my years at Wizards. I also worked for WizKids, so they made like Hero Clicks and a bunch of games like that. And a couple other, I had a really fun career in the gaming industry. So,
yeah, that's super cool. I do remember Hero Clicks, but I didn't get into them as much as D&D. I feel like that was kind of a thing that came and went, at least for me, about 10 years ago.
Yeah. That's like ancient history. I was working there early 2000s, so long time ago.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a neat background, and maybe we'll come back to that. But I don't know how exactly the listeners would feel if I completely turn this into D&D discussion, which is a possibility, I guess. We did a live.
That would be a first for Sasquatchers.
Yeah, we did a live recently, and I started talking Star Wars, and some of the comments were like, "Oh, Andrew being a Star Wars nerd is the least surprising thing ever." So there's clearly a way that I'm portrayed, and it might not be any surprise at all that we start talking D&D. But you have a ton of paranormal experiences that you bring to the topic of discussion here. So I think what we should do is just jump right into this Columbia River Gorge in Washington State. Washington, to my knowledge, is kind of like a hotbed for paranormal stuff, and certainly cryptid. And Bigfoot, that's definitely a Bigfoot hotbed for sure. So I'm curious, let's just start at the beginning here. How did you wind up doing the outdoor store?
So my wife and I were living up in Seattle, and my mother-in-law had started a number of businesses down here in the Gorge. And about 3 years ago, she passed away. And so my wife and I made the decision to sort of uproot our lives and come down here and run the family businesses. And one of them was a store that its format wasn't quite working. And so with all my outdoor adventure experience, we sort of changed the format and turned it into an outdoor adventure store. So we sell things like, backpacks and ropes and climbing gear and, canteens and all the kind of stuff that you would need to go on awesome adventures. The Gorge is easily one of the coolest adventure areas in the world. And we'll get into that in a minute. So we converted the format of the store to this outdoor store, and right away, spontaneously, people started coming in and telling us their stories about encounters with Sasquatch and UFOs and even things much stranger than that. And I was fascinated. And, due to some experiences I've had in the past, I realized that oftentimes with these stories, there's a kernel of truth, and it's worth taking the time to listen to these folks and hear them out. So I put up a big sign in the store, and right on the window, it's a huge sign that says "File paranormal reports here: Sasquatch sightings, UFO encounters, ghost experiences. We want to hear about it." And I gave very special instructions to all the employees, and I said, "We are going to treat everyone who walks in here with an unusual story with the utmost respect, and we're going to give them, we're going to pay attention. We're going to ask intelligent follow-up questions. We're not going to giggle or smirk or question the veracity of their report. We're going to simply take in the data and see where that leads us." And I realized that my bio is a little outdated. We've been doing this for just a little over 2 years, maybe 2 years and a few months. And we are now coming up on 300 reports. And it spans a gamut. Of course, we have tons of Sasquatch stories, a lot of UFO stories, and there's some variants of UFO stories. We've got, of course, classic UFOs like the triangle-shaped UFOs and tic-tac-shaped UFOs and some other ones. But we also have glowing orbs, a lot of reports. In fact, I've actually captured a picture of one myself. And we have advanced military aircraft in the area as well. We also have a lot of ghost stories. Some of the towns out here, like the Dalles, which is about 25 minutes east of my store, was the end of the Oregon Trail. And it was as much a Western town as you can imagine, with gunfights in the streets and a Chinatown with tunnels underneath the roads and riverboats and everything you can imagine out there. So a lot of ghost stories out in that area. There's stories of small humanoids, portals opening. Folks have had experiences with temporal and spatial displacement. And the thing that's really most interesting to me is we've had well over, getting close to 90 reports of an enormous Black Panther creature that we call the Klickitat ape cat. And surprisingly, the most rational and reasonable explanation for its presence here is that it may have escaped from the Hanford Nuclear Laboratory, which is just upriver from us. And the historical data on that one is eye-opening, shocking. And like I said, if you don't want to evoke some type of paranormal reason why close to 90 people have seen an enormous black cat here in Klickitat County, escaped from a Department of Energy top secret nuclear site is the most reasonable. So lots of stuff to cover. Like I said, for me, it's been a pretty amazing journey. Like I said, we work very hard to treat people with respect. And it's gotten to the point where, in fact, just this morning, I was picking up my lunch at Muggs, a little diner in town. And a gentleman came up to me and shared 3 or 4 experiences that he had in the gorge. And so I'm well known in the area, and a lot of people feel comfortable opening up. Very rewarding. Some people have been holding on to these stories for decades, and they may have tested the waters, maybe told their friends or their family members, and just been laughed at or ridiculed or worse. And so they've learned to clam up. And like I said, we've created a safe space for people to tell these stories. And wow, the things that we hear are remarkable, astonishing, amazing. And it's no coincidence, I would say. I mean, we talked about a little bit about my adventure background, being a soldier and a search and rescue EMT and a number of other things. And the gorge is a stunning place for adventures. And then once I realized that it was also populated with mythical creatures, talk about living out a D&D fantasy in real life. Like, this is kind of really, to me, just so compelling and so interesting. And so, yeah, that's kind of how things got started. And like I said, just in this past few days, like since Saturday, we've had 6 or 7 new reports. And they span the gamut. It's, like I said, it's a complete joy to live in a place where all of the questions don't have answers. And I just love that about this area.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I wish that I also lived in like a place that was like magical like that, but something that
I live in Cleveland, and there's a lot of unanswered questions here.
I'm from Ohio. Actually, I was raised just east of Cleveland in a little town called Chagrin Falls. And
I live in Euclid, actually. But Chagrin Falls is not too far from here.
Yeah,
about half an hour.
The gorge itself, I mean, it might help your viewers to understand, or your listeners to understand a little bit about the place that we're talking about. So the Columbia River is the largest river in North and South America that flows into the Pacific Ocean. And it forms the border between Washington State, so southern Washington State, and northern Oregon State. The gorge is an area, it's about 80 miles long. And back in the 1980s, the U.S. Congress got together and they created a special new law just to protect this place because it is so jaw-droppingly beautiful. Basically, the river cuts a gorge through the Cascade Mountains. It's the only sea level passage through this mountain range. And there are cliffs that are 1,000 feet tall here. In fact, you can go from sea level to 3,000 feet in half a mile in some areas of the gorge. So the mountains form a rain shadow, and the western half of the gorge is a Pacific Northwest rainforest. But there's a rain shadow on the eastern side, and so it forms this beautiful high plains desert. And so we've got everything from those deep, mysterious pine forests to, barren desert mesas, and this powerful, powerful river running through the middle of it all. There are over 90 named waterfalls on the Oregon side alone. Some of those are over 600 feet tall. And in fact, the gorge has got the highest concentration of waterfalls anywhere in the United States. So my store is sort of located right at the transition between the rainforest and the desert, a little town called Bingen, Washington. Right across the river from us, there's an old 100-year-old bridge, and it's the town of Hood River. Hood River is famous for windsurfing and that kind of kiteboarding and that kind of stuff. And within 35 miles of my store are 3 stratovolcanoes that are over 10,000 feet tall and perpetually clad in glaciers. We've got Mount St. Helens, which famously erupted in 1980. There's Mount Adams, which is an enormous UFO hotspot and has roots that go all the way back to the Kenneth Arnold sighting in June of 1947, which is basically the first UFO sighting, flying saucer sighting that sort of set America ablaze with the whole notion of flying saucers. And then south of us, we've got Mount Hood, which is a huge Bigfoot area. And so it's a volcanically active area. And there are at least 600 caves out here. And so we've got whitewater rafting, paragliding, mountain climbing, hiking, whitewater rafting. Basically, it is like the world's greatest open world map. In fact, right behind me is a map that I drew of the area. And it sort of, points out a lot of the paranormal sightings that we've had. So the place is, just like I said, it is stunningly beautiful. I live in Skamania County, about 25 minutes away from the store. So I start off in the rainforest and I drive to the edge of the desert every day through one of the most beautiful places in the world. And I think we've got some very unusual geology here. And I have a strong belief, a theory, that it is our very unique geology, which is somewhat responsible for the way over indexing we have on paranormal reports. So I'll just give you a brief geologic background. So about 17 million years ago, this enormous fissure opened in the earth at the Washington-Idaho border, and huge volumes of lava sprayed out of this. It's like a classic Kilauea ropey, soupy lava. And it flowed through the ancient, what was then a very gradual valley, 300 miles through the valley all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And I have to express to you like the unfathomable amount of lava that came out of this fissure. So this thing erupted for millions of years. But in some places in Washington state, the lava is over 3 miles thick. If you took all the lava that came out of this thing and spread it out evenly over the lower 48 states, it would bury the entire U.S. in 60 feet of lava. Well, the reason why this is important is that, so you imagine that lava comes and it flows, and as it's cooling, all of the magnetic material in it just orients towards the Earth's magnetic North Pole. And then it hardens and it gets locked in place. Well, there have been over 300 of these lava flows, and some of them are separated by 10,000 years, 100,000 years, things like that. And as each flow came, the Earth's magnetic pole is wandering. So in the last 100 years, it's moved 700 miles. And so each new layer orients towards the new magnetic North Pole. And every one of them has got a very unique and different magnetic signature than the one below it. So we've got this stack of lava flows, and each band has got its own magnetic signature. And what that has done is that even now today, when you look at the government navigation maps of the gorge, there are these bright pink letters on it that warn you that your compass readings will be off in this area. So that was sort of like the first geologic thing that happened, was this enormous amount of lava came flowing through here and created this layer cake of rock. Then about 2 or 3 million years ago, we started having the Cascade Mountains. So we had this vertical uplift of lava that's forming all of these volcanoes, and it took all those layers and bent them. So as complicated as that magnetic situation was, it got even more complicated when it got contorted and bent. And then, of course, all those volcanoes had their own lava flows. And then about 15,000 years ago, some of your listeners may be familiar with the work of Graham Hancock or Randall Carlson talking about the Younger Dryas floods. And so that happened right in my backyard. And basically, there was this enormous lake that formed in Missoula, Montana, was held back by an Ice Age glacier. This is 15,000 years ago or so. Well, that dam catastrophically failed, and in a single day, all of the water, which is basically the quantity of all the water in the Great Lakes, rushed across Washington state. The flood across eastern Washington was about 300 feet deep. They estimate that it was equal to all of the rivers on Earth combined times 10. So just a massive flow of water. And it got held up at the eastern end of the gorge, a place called Wallula Gap. And then it shot down the gorge at 70 miles an hour. And where my store is, that water was 800 to 900 feet deep. And it was carrying boulders and trees and icebergs and everything else. And it completely scoured the landscape. Nothing living survived. And so we had these true apocalypses. We had this apocalypse of fire and then a cataclysm of water. And what that water did, those giant floods did, was they stripped everything off of those rock layers and laid them bare. So it's basically this live wire. And so that's sort of the geologic history. And so it has created this really complex and unique electromagnetic environment. Then you add on to that, there are 14 hydroelectric dams on the Columbia River. The Columbia River produces 44% of all the hydroelectric power in the U.S. Basically, these turbines generate enough energy to power a city the size of Seattle and 7 more just like it. And all that power gets transmitted through the gorge on these, transmission lines. And so as weird and crazy as everything was before, now we've got the energy of the river. Literally, it's not just like a woo-woo energy. It's being converted into electricity, energy form that we know how to work with, and then, transported through the area. So all that is to say that we've got this really unique electromagnetic environment out here. And, there are some stories that we've heard that really made me take a look at some research that was done in the 80s and 90s. So there's a professor, Dr. Michael Persinger, up in university in Ontario, Laurentide University. He created this thing called the God helmet. He didn't call it the God helmet. Media called it the God helmet. And basically what he did was he took a motorcycle helmet and put some solenoids on it and was able to manipulate magnetic fields around the human brain. And when he did this, he was able to elicit a whole host of what would be called paranormal perceptions. People had sensed presence. A few of his subjects actually claimed to have seen God. And that's how it got the name the God helmet. But he was able to do also things like turn fear on and off like a switch. And so there's a number of effects that happened. And so the reason why his device worked is that the human brain has magnetite crystals in them. These are magnetically active crystals, and they estimate that in some of the most important structures, like the temporal lobes and the hippocampus, that there are over 5 million magnetite crystals per gram of brain matter. And it is reactive to magnetic fields. And most mammals and many other animals also have magnetite crystals in their brains. And it is believed now that this is what's responsible for things like, navigational abilities of animals and things like that. And so, like I said, we've got this wide range of phenomenon that people are experiencing here. And, I've had a few unusual experiences myself, some strange sightings, some vocalizations that I've heard. And I've been in certain areas where I've had spatial displacement. And then, so I've had a limited number of experiences. And then we have a huge volume of reports, like I say, close to 300 reports. And so whatever is causing this, for whatever reason, and I think it has to do with this electromagnetic environment, we have people having really unusual experiences. So I'll give you an example. So there is an area, it's probably 3-4 miles east of my store, and it's called Underwood Mountain. And let's see, it was springtime of last year. A woman sent in a picture, and there was like a tic-tac shaped UFO, like right over Underwood Mountain, like right, you could see it right at the summit. We did a little image enhancement. She had taken the picture from 12 miles away. It looked a lot like a Tic Tac that you see on the gun cameras from the fighter jets. And the Navy fighter jets took those famous pictures, right? So it looks just like that. No props, no wings or anything like that. And that's sitting on top of Underwood Mountain. So interesting data point. Really can't say for sure what it was. Limited amount of data in the picture. But I myself took a picture just below that. So at the base of Underwood Mountain at the river level, I captured a picture of a blue glowing orb. My wife and I have seen these orbs with our naked eye, and I was lucky enough to capture a picture of one. But we have dozens of reports of people seeing glowing orbs in that same area. And then midway up that mountain, there's a number of vineyards. It's a very hospitable climate to growing wine grapes and things like that. And a gentleman said that he had seen two red glowing orbs sort of doing almost leapfrogging each other in the sky. They descended to ground level. He reports that he thinks that they turned into something that looked like a pair of eyes, and they began approaching him. And then he said, and this was the interesting data point for me, that like a switch, fear was turned on in his brain, and he felt suddenly awash with terror. And so he ran into his house, grabbed a shotgun, and by the time he came back out, the phenomenon had ended and was no longer present. And that was really a key report for me, because he reported experiencing exactly what Dr. Michael Persinger was able to elicit in the laboratory setting with his device, this notion of fear being turned on and off. And Underwood Mountain is one of those places where those layers of lava with the unique magnetic signatures have been bent into a mountain shape. So it's a very convoluted and twisted area there. And so that's just one example of how we've got this array of phenomena occurring in a very specific geographic area. It's associated with these magnetic bands that have been twisted and folded. And we're seeing this exact same type of phenomenon that scientists who are studying the stuff in the lab are able to replicate. And so really interesting stuff, right? And so as I think about this, a few things come to mind. So we have had, very close to that area, this weekend, a woman came into the store, and she said that her and her friends, there was 9 people in total, were laying in a field, and they were watching a meteor shower. It was last September, and they were also watching the satellites fly by, and then they saw 2 pinpoints of light looking like satellites sort of tracking each other across the sky. And we've had a number of reports in the store, people who've seen the Starlink satellites, and they get excited that they maybe have seen a UFO, but there's a clear terrestrial explanation for Starlink satellites. For the listeners who don't know, Starlink has this array of satellites that have, I think Elon Musk put them up into orbit. And it's basically a long line of lights. And when you see it for the first time, if you haven't heard about it, you, for all the world, believe you're looking at UFOs. So I didn't say anything while she was giving a report, but I thought, I hope this isn't another Starlink report. Well, then things got weird. She said, then right when it got right on top of us, a green laser-like light in a sheet came down and scanned the tree line across the field, over them, the rest of the field, then up the tree line on the other side, and then disappeared. And all 9 folks witnessed this together. So we've got the situation where we have co-witnessed events, right? There's a number of stories, reports we've had. We had 6 whitewater rafting guides witnessed a enormous egg-shaped UFO for 45 minutes. So we've got a number of these co-witnessed events. We've got events that are captured on camera. So my glowing orb and the UFO. We have a number of things like Sasquatch footprints are common to find out here. One of the folks has come in and brought me numerous hair samples of Sasquatches, or allegedly Sasquatches. I can't say for sure. And so when you think about Persinger's work, you could say, well, you're simply manipulating an individual's brain state and causing a personal hallucination. But since we've got co-witnessed events and we've got physical evidence in the form of footprints and hair samples, and we've got photographs, that explanation breaks down. It can't be a personal hallucination when you've got physical evidence, photographs, and co-witnessed events. And what I think might be happening is, think about like a radio station. So you've got your radio tuned to a classic music station, and you can clearly perceive classical music. But when you adjust that receiving apparatus just a tiny bit, you can suddenly be listening to talk radio or rock and roll or a number of different things. And those signals are present at all times. It's just you're not tuned to hear them. And I think what's happening out here in the gorge is that people, because of our unique magnetic environment, maybe things that are going on with the solar weather and its impacts on the Earth's magnetosphere, maybe even things as personal as what you had for breakfast, if you ate more potassium or whatever that morning, might be affecting your receiving apparatus, and you're tuning into things that are always there but aren't part of your normal setting. So that's kind of the theory that I'm working on. But man, the number of experiences that have occurred out here is remarkable. So Washington State has got the highest number of Sasquatch sightings per capita of any state in the country. It also has the highest number of UFO sightings of any state per capita in the country. And the two counties Washington State counties that are in the gorge are Skamania County, which is on the west side, and Klickitat County, which is on the east side. And those of Washington State have got the highest reported sightings for both of those type of things. In fact, Skamania County was the first county in the U.S. to pass legislation that made it illegal to harm or hunt Bigfoot. And it was initially a felony, and then they modified the laws to say that if you shoot this thing and it's humanoid, you'll be charged for manslaughter. And so it's a pretty serious thing. And that happened, I think, in 1968. So for a long time, there's something about this place that is inducing people to file more reports than you'd find anywhere else in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I had a lot of stuff in there that I wanted to come back to, because everything you said was just kind of fascinating. And as soon as I was about to ask a question, you'd say something else that was just about even more fascinating. So I'm sorry that I let you kind of talk so long, but I was kind of intently listening and just kind of being educated. I think, first of all, I wanted to comment and say that the approach that you have about treating everybody with respect who comes in and files these claims, it's noble, and I wanted to commend you on that, because I have a community first approach to everything that we do, and I have been interviewing people myself. On the side, we have kind of branched out and expanded, and I've been working on some documentary stuff. JC and I, we just put one out not too long ago, and I'm working ground legwork on some stuff that over here in Pennsylvania, he's not really able to help so far on day-to-day stuff. So I've been doing a lot of conversations and interviews with people, and it's shocking to me how terrified people are of, what their spouses would think or what their employers would think. And there's a lot of stuff that has gone unsaid for a really long time because people are just outright terrified of what the public opinion is going to be. And I think we're getting better with that as a society. I think even the last year alone, to me, seems like there's a spectacular number of people who are kind of willing to set that fear aside, but it's still a slow process. So I think it's really cool that you take that stance and you allow these individuals to have that platform and avenue for, getting this off of their chest, because that could be super heavy too, to live with that and not have anybody to talk to. So I think that's really cool. And I just want to thank you for that, just from another researcher's perspective and experiencer myself. I won't bore anybody with the details that we've heard millions of times on this show, but I've also seen some things and experienced them, and I've dealt with that same public opinion.
I know this story probably better than he does because he's told it so many times.
Well, I mean, people.
I had nothing to do with it.
Right. But anybody listening has already heard it. I'd be happy to share it with you off of the recording. But getting onto your experience, I wanted to ask you. You had talked about seeing these orbs personally, and I wanted to see if you had a gauge of how big they were. What size were these orbs that you were able to witness with your eye?
Yeah, so it's a strange thing because they're often distant. And so there's a couple of different kind of orbs that people have reported. The picture that I took, the orb appears to be larger than a car, right? And it's sort of floating over the river, but near a road, and there are some cars on the road, and you can kind of get a sense of, perspective there. And so sometimes they're that large. Oftentimes you're seeing them from a distance, difficult to say. Other folks report seeing them in the forests near their home. And these are seemingly more, volleyball sized or basketball sized. And so we've had numerous reports of, these flying at altitude. There's a giant core of an ancient volcano. It's called Beacon Rock. It's this 800-foot tall, basically plug. Everything was stripped away from it during the floods, and all that's left is this giant 800-foot monolith. They say it's the second largest monolith in the Northern Hemisphere. And I had one lady come and report that she saw an orb flying towards that at about 400 feet, and then it got to just in front of that, monolith, and then it shot straight up in the air. Also around that area, we've had the maintenance workers report seeing apparitions at some of the trailheads. And other folks have reported seeing these glowing orbs at ground level, sort of will-o'-the-wisp type of experience. And those seem to be about basketball sized. And so there's a pretty big variety. And it's again, one of those mysteries that I have reports, I have theories, but I don't have a lot of good data on what we're actually talking about. What they may be, or, if they are, there's some folks that have had reports that seem to associate. In fact, just this weekend, we had a report of some folks who were camping on the Oregon side of the river, and they watched this strange glowing orb sort of bouncing along the top of a ridgeline and came down and then was heading up in the forest towards them. It extinguished, and then they heard vocalizations. It sounded very much like Sasquatch vocalizations. And one of the witnesses was an elderly couple, but the time they saw it, they were in their late 20s, and the wife ran into their camper. The husband grabbed his gun, and they report seeing a shadowy figure that they described as Sasquatch-like. They came back to that same area a couple weeks later, and something grabbed onto their camper and was rocking it up and down while they were inside of it. Interestingly, the reason why I bring it up is because that experience started with an orb experience and then seemed to transform or be somehow associated with Sasquatch experience.
That's a pretty popular thing that's going on with Sasquatch right now, I've noticed. And even in our area, some of the people that I've spoken with who are Sasquatch experiencers all kind of say that it's preceded by seeing orbs, or they'll be out. There are areas that are hotbeds here, and we have people that camp with the express purpose of, encountering Sasquatch, and they'll end up having all of these experiences with orbs. And what I think is interesting is I'm in Pennsylvania, but I'm in like the northern part of the Appalachian Mountains. So I think correlation isn't causation, but I see correlation between these orbs and Sasquatch, and it tends to be like a mountain type area where this is going on. So a lot of people that I know in this area have spoken about it, and obviously that's Appalachian Mountains, and I've seen reports in Tennessee and other parts on the East Coast. So it is reassuring to that theory to see that over on that other side of the country, in the other mountain ranges, that this is also occurring. I think that adds some credence and a sense of believability to it. As far as scientific method is concerned. But yeah, that's one of the reasons I'd asked. And then also my UFO experience that everybody's tired of hearing about was orb related. So it had started, with seeing orbs come up out over the tree line. And so I'm always really into hearing orb stuff for that reason alone, because it kind of harkens back to the experience that I had. And so I think that's super neat. I hate to jump, but there's so many things. I don't want to miss out on talking about this black cat that you guys have in that area, because again, that's something that is really prevalent now. It's actually not just your area. That's something I'm seeing pop up on forums and stuff. And I think right around in Michigan as well. I was doing some Dogman research recently about the Beast of Bray Road and touching up on that literature. And they have this, similar thing going on with a large black panther. And to me, as far as like researching cryptids go, this one appeals to me in a way that a lot of others don't, because it seems, I don't want to say the most realistic, but it seems like the most plausible and easy to discuss around like people that don't want to talk about dogmen and Sasquatch and stuff. So it's been catching my eye that is occurring. So I was curious if we could maybe get more into the black cat situation that you got going on.
Sure. Yeah. So we call it the Klickitat ape cat because we're here in Klickitat County, and most of the initial reports come from this area. And the very first report, a gentleman came into the store. It was close to closing time. This was a few years back, and he apparently was friends with my mother-in-law, Margie, or his family was, and she had helped him with their family with some medical things. Margie was a very accomplished pharmacist, and so he was kind of a friend of the family. And it took him about 45 minutes to work up the courage to tell me his story, but he was orienteering out near Buck Creek, again, maybe 4 miles east of the store, and his compass started acting weird. In and of itself, not a big deal in the gorge. Compasses go weird here all the time. And then he said he looked up across a creek and he saw this enormous black cat. So this was the first report that I had ever heard of it. And he said that this cat had jet black fur, a long black tail, very muscular, and it stood about 4 or 5 feet tall at the shoulder. All right. So at this point in the story, there's a bunch of flags raising for me. Of course, we have cougar out here, but a 24-inch tall cougar is an enormous cougar. And so the fact that he was reporting one that's 4 feet tall, well, that's bigger than a tiger, and a tiger is the biggest living cat that we know of. So the size is a obvious, okay, that's something to pay attention to. The fact that it was black in color, another thing to pay attention to. When we talk to our wildlife professionals, they say there are no such thing as black cougars. Cougars are typically a tawny, tannish color. And when they express their melanin, they go more towards of a reddish color. But black is not on the menu for cougars. The only large black cat in North America is a jaguar. And their range is 1,000 miles south of Klickitat County, sort of the southern areas of Arizona and New Mexico, that type of thing. So those two facts are pretty unusual. The fact that the cat, he said that he was there and observed it for about 5 minutes. So cougars will abandon a fresh kill just at the sound of a human voice. And the fact that this creature was staying with him and not bounding off into the forest or disappearing, but staring him down, was another factor for me, having had to deal with wildlife through all my professional outdoor activities. So we're dealing with an animal already that is exhibiting qualities that is not an animal that's recognized by science. And he got close to the end of his story and he said, James, the strangest thing was it had a face that looked like a monkey. And so I pressed him on that. He said that it had intelligent ape-like eyes and a number of other primate-like features, a more flattened snout, things of that nature. And again, I was astonished. I'd never heard anything like that. And so, of course, I started doing some research and learned a little bit about things like the Beast of Bodmin Moor in England and some other black animal sightings, but none of them seemed to indicate anything having to do with this monkey-like face. Interestingly, I did find one Native American story out by where you guys are in the Great Lakes. There is a tradition of a race of underwater panther protectors. These are supernatural beings called the Mishepeshu. And one of the descriptions that I read, it said sometimes they take the form of a black panther with the face of a man. And I thought, oh, that sounds a lot like this creature that was described. Well, I was pretty excited about this. If you think about it, like at our store, 2-3 times a week, something like this week, it's 6 times this week, a new Scooby-Doo mystery walks through our door and, we get to engage with it and talk to these people and sort of try to figure out what's going on. And I was really excited about it. So I talked to my employees about it the next day and I described this creature. And Missy, one of my employees, she started shaking and she said, "Oh my God, James, I've seen that creature myself." And so she was driving down Klickitat Canyon, which is sort of runs off Klickitat Glacier on Mount Adams and then feeds into the Columbia River. And she said that she saw that creature on the side of the road. And so she didn't get a look at its face, but she said, "I know it was a cat. It had black fur and a long black tail, and it was huge." In fact, when she described it to her family, what a lot of folks do is they want to normalize a situation, right? Life is hard enough. You don't need giant black cats running around. And we do this to ourselves, I think. I think a lot of people have had extraordinary experiences, but they try to talk themselves out of it. And that's typically what will happen with, family members or friends that you explain a situation. Oh, you saw a bear, your eyes were playing tricks on you, you were drunk, you had, some kind of other thing going on. But what's interesting, when she told her family and she described the size of the creature, they said, "Oh, you probably just saw a black cow." So, this is a grown woman. I think we can give her the benefit of the doubt that she knows the difference between a cow and a cat. But what I find remarkable is that her description elicited the comparison to a cow. Mm-hmm. And, like I said, even tigers, which are huge animals, are maybe 36 inches at the shoulder. Nothing is 4 or 5 feet tall. And just so your audience is aware, we've had close to 90 reports now. I would say about half of them describe this enormous size, right? This 4 to 5 feet tall. In fact, this just a few days ago, might have been last week, a guy was up by Mount St. Helens and he was driving his car home down one of the mountain roads. And this enormous cat jumped into the middle of the road, basically landed on the double yellow line, and then jumped over the guardrail and down a hill. He said that the creature that he saw was as tall as his Honda Civic, which is a 4.5 feet tall vehicle. And from my perspective, I'm trying to make sense of this and understand what we're talking about. And, as many, I've heard senior law enforcement officials talk about this thing, and I have trouble wrapping my head around, how could this thing exist? And maybe I think to myself, oh, maybe people are just, inflating the size in their mind, or they didn't get a really good look at it. I'm trying to make sense of it. And then, but we have so many reports, other people will say it jumped across the road, and as it was stretched out, its hind legs to front legs stretched from white line across the double yellow line to the white line again. And again and again and again, we hear these stories of enormous size. I looked into it. There's only one creature in the fossil record that matches this thing. A little bit comforting to know that there was a biological creature that matched its size. It was the Ice Age creature, the American lion. Scientific name is the Panthera atrox. And this was a gigantic cat, the biggest cat that ever lived. Lived here in Washington State. It was all over America, but it was supposedly gone extinct 10,000 years ago. A couple interesting facts. The thing weighed well over 1,000 pounds. It had the largest brain capacity of any cat that ever lived. And it had sexual dimorphism. It's a scientific term that means the females and males are shaped differently. In this case, females were much smaller than the males. And but that creature is supposed to be extinct. So there's no evidence to suggest that it's still prowling around out here, other than the fact that we've had, like I said, 90 reports of this enormous cat. And so once I heard Missy, to me, like, okay, these were, in my mind, two credible reports. Someone that I work with, that I know very well, who has no reason to lie and clearly had a strong emotional response to this. And then this other guy who was a friend of the family, and for a number of reasons, his story was credible to me. So with the advertising budget of the store, we started putting out radio ads that says, has anyone else seen a black cat? And we put up flyers at the trailheads. And lo and behold, the reports started rushing in. And so, like I said, we've had close to 100 reports of this creature. Somebody caught some crappy, grainy video footage of it at the west end of the gorge last summer. And so report after report after report. And so I began to try to make sense of this thing. I'm very open-minded to all types of different phenomenon existing. Things don't necessarily, in my mind, have to come from the physical realm. The Native Americans have these traditions for good reasons. But you still want to look for the most logical and reasonable explanation. And so I'm sure that your listeners have heard of the Manhattan Project. So this was the project during World War II that created the atomic bomb. And everyone is very familiar with Los Alamos, where you had Oppenheimer down there with his team of engineers and brilliant scientists designing the bomb. But what a lot of people don't know is that in Hanford, so this is a area east of the Columbia River Gorge, a little bit north, and along the Columbia River, the government basically evicted everyone who was living on this 600 square mile plot of land on the Columbia River. They evicted the white settlers that were out there and the Native Americans who had traditional hunting grounds and fishing grounds and all that kind of stuff. They sent them away, and they built the world's first industrial scale nuclear reactor to forge the plutonium that would be the fuel for eventually 60,000 nuclear weapons. So the Hanford site was so today it's called the Department of Energy, but back then it went through a bunch of different name changes, but originally started as the Manhattan Project. And so this was the most important top secret site that we had, right? During World War II, it was 100% secret. And then we won the war with, so the very first atomic explosion in the history of mankind was the Trinity test. That was Hanford plutonium. Then they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, and then that came from Tennessee. And then the one that was dropped on Nagasaki, that was also Hanford plutonium. So a really critical site, right? So you have to put yourself back in the mindset of the Allied leaders. So they're terrified that the Nazis are going to unlock the secrets of the atom before we do. In the 1940s, we didn't know much about radiation, but we did know that it induced mutations. And so of course, we've got that team dedicated to building the bomb. But at Hanford, from day one, they had an animal testing program out there, right? Mm-hmm. And so the Nazis were super interested in creating super soldiers and super animals. In fact, there's historical documentation that says they actually brought back an extinct Ice Age creature called the aurochs, which is this gigantic hyper-aggressive bull. And they were actually able to, through retrobreeding and a number of other weird Nazi science things, basically populate an entire forest in Poland with these things. And so the Allies were terrified that not only would they figure out how to build a bomb, but what happens if they start creating super creatures? And so they recruited a scientist from the University of Washington named Dr. Lauren Donaldson. And Donaldson's only academic achievement before getting this assignment was he had created a super animal. He created a thing called the Donaldson super trout, which is this trout. It's a fish that's 8 times larger and stronger than a normal trout. It reaches sexual maturity in half the time. It can swim in salt water and fresh water. It's super survivable, and it's still a viable species today. In fact, they stock fisheries with it. And so Donaldson is the guy that they put in charge of the animal testing program at Hanford from day one. And this is, like I said, an incredibly important and sensitive site for us, right? They called it the apocalypse factory because of all the plutonium. Like literally the product of this facility could destroy the world. So we win World War II. Hanford gets announced to the public. And then the Cold War starts up because the Russians start scooping up Nazi scientists. And so the U.S. government is terrified that what happens if they get all the smart Nazi scientists. So we start scooping up Nazi scientists through Operation Paperclip. And so then those Nazi scientists get inculcated into our military industrial complex. Well, Donaldson winds up going down to the South Pacific, and he's part of like the Bikini Atoll test and the Castle Bravo disaster and all that other kind of crap that's going on down there. But he stays in touch with Hanford, and the new guy there is a guy named Bill Baer. And under Bill, this facility expanded to be able to house 1,000 large animals at a time. Like it's a massive facility, right? And they're doing all kinds of tests. And on the surface, they're saying, well, we're testing like what happens to livestock. So like if a cow gets caught up in fallout, can you still drink its milk? Or like what happens to sheep? Like there's a lot of really important questions that they don't know the answers to, like what happens if there's a nuclear war to animals and livestock. But they're also doing tests. Like there's this thing called the Green Run where they took the filters off the stacks and they irradiated the local population in a 200-mile square mile area, and they didn't tell anyone. And there's a whole lawsuit from these downwinders, people who were living in the area who got exposed to radiation that was intentionally released on unwitting subjects. So they're doing lots of weird stuff out there. And did I lose you? Because my screen just went blank.
No, we can still hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there we go. We're back. And so Bill Baer, so that facility was closed down in 1980, the 1980s. And what happened was that Bill Baer wound up doing a number of oral histories, like oral history interviews. And there's 3 that I found. And in one of them, actually in all 3 of them, he describes how they were irradiating apex predators and how those apex predators escaped and they couldn't recapture them. And he actually holds up a picture of the device that they were using to irradiate alligators. And he's got he's irradiating close to 30 alligators. And he goes on to tell the story of how one night, 6 of these experimental apex predators who've been irradiated outsmarted the scientists and escaped into the Columbia River. And so there's newspaper articles about it from the time that corroborate this. And so they had this terrible situation. They had a covert army hunting team that went out every day for 6 months to hunt these creatures down. And they only ever caught 4 of them, right? And so what that tells us is we know for sure that at Hanford, they're experimenting on apex predators. Those apex predators, they couldn't contain them. And then once they escaped, they couldn't recapture them. And so what does that have to do with big cats? Well, in order to bring a little more context, I have to tell you about dolphins. So since 1958, the U.S. government has been using dolphins to guard our most sensitive nuclear sites. And the reason why is many of our nuclear sites are on waterways. Here in Washington, we have the Bangor sub base, which is like the port of call for many of our nuclear subs. If Washington were its own nation, it would be the third largest nuclear power in the world because of the Bangor sub base. But they're always worried about Soviet scuba divers coming in and surveilling or sabotaging these sites. And you can't protect that with sonar, because sonar, like a Soviet scuba diver, doesn't look any different than a like tuna fish or a sea lion or some other aquatic animal. But you can train a dolphin to tell the difference. And they would rig the dolphins with a sort of like a barb-like harpoon on their snout, and they'd train them to ram that harpoon into the flesh of the diver. And then a balloon would inflate, to bring that diver to the surface, and the Navy would scoop them up, and they could gather intelligence from, like, if you think about it, a dead diver at the bottom of the ocean tells you nothing. You really want to know, where he's from and what kind of gear he's carrying, and if he's still alive, what information you can get out of him. And so what that tells us is that the U.S. government was effectively deploying animals as sentry creatures to protect our most sensitive nuclear sites. And so Hanford has got 45 miles of the Columbia River that flows right through the middle of it. So that's 90 miles of river coastline that they need to guard. And if you're a zealous cold warrior, you're going to ask yourself, okay, can we get the dolphins in here? And the answer is no, because the Columbia River is freshwater. Dolphins only operate in saltwater. So the next question you're going to ask yourself is, what is the world's most effective riverine hunter? And that creature turns out to be a black jaguar. So jaguars can hold their breath for 15 minutes. They can swim a kilometer in the open ocean. They can eat underwater. They can kill alligators with a single bite to the back of the head. And that's because, pound for pound, they're the strongest of the big cats. Interestingly, they also have night vision that is 6 times better than a human being. And most importantly, they always instinctively drag their prey to shore. And so you've got sort of the foundation of an amazing sentry creature, one that's going to do everything that you need it to if you could just train it right and get it squared away to be, the kind of creature that you could put on patrol. And just to give you a sense, like, this may sound crazy that they're doing this, but we had Nike missiles were part of the defense. So the idea was a Nike missile is basically a surface-to-air nuclear-tipped weapon, and it's designed to handle a Soviet bomber threat. So they were so worried that the Soviets would bomb Hanford that it seemed like a better strategic move to detonate a nuclear warhead over civilian populations and take out those bombers rather than to let those bombers hit Hanford. And there were 4 Nike missile launch sites there at Hanford, and each one of those sites were guarded by dogs. And in the literature, it says that the military considered a dog to be worth 10 soldiers in a sentry role. And so there's a really high incentive to find animals that are going to be able to protect this river weak point, right? How do you ensure that we don't have swimmers coming through and getting ready to sabotage and surveil these things? Because the actual nuclear reactors are really close to the river, and they needed that water for cooling. And so what we think happened was the alligators were part of a sentry program. I mean, if you think about it, there's no domestic need for alligators. We don't get milk from alligators. We don't, typically eat alligator meat. Like, we don't eat alligator eggs. Those alligators were likely there as a sentry pilot program. And we also think that these Black Panthers were part of a similar program. When you look at where Hanford is located, if you travel north, east, or south from Hanford, it's just more and more desert. If you head west into Klickitat County, where all these cats are now being reported, there's enormous amounts of available habitat and food, prey animals, all kinds of places to hide and live and thrive. And so what we think happened was, just like these gators, these experimental cats outsmarted the scientists. They escaped. And once they escaped, they couldn't recapture them. And so we have reports. The earliest report of a big black cat here goes all the way back to 1968. Interestingly, there have been no hostile encounters with these creatures. And that is really unusual. except when you think about what would happen with a sentry creature. So a sentry creature, you don't want it to indiscriminately attack humans in sight. In fact, you want it to be respectful of humans because it's got to deal with its trainers, right? You don't want the trainers being killed. And then under certain conditions or under certain, keywords or whatever way you would activate it, it is only then that it would become the kind of killing machine that you would hope would be in a sentry role. So a lot of the facts, a lot of the observed data points that we have about these creatures seem to match this theory that it escaped from the animal testing laboratory just upriver from us.
That is super interesting and not quite what I expected when we started asking questions about it. I
want to paint a real quick picture for everybody, because I don't know if anyone noticed, but I had a little laugh there, and it goes back to the aurochs that the Nazis were trying to do. And one of my favorite topics is Nazi mythicism and occultism and that. But anyways, I'm just imagining that they have this super bull that they've created and they've bred in the forest of Poland. You just being some like random Polish dude walking through the woods one day, just getting wrecked, absolutely wrecked by this super bull.
Like what Johnny Knoxville would do with that bull.
Well, apparently they were such abominations that when the Allies found them, they slaughtered them all because they thought this is just too dangerous to have them cruising around. And I think the whole reasons why the Nazis put them out there is because they wanted something worthy of a great Nazi hunter, something they could hunt that was dangerous enough for them to actually take on. So it's a crazy story, but we were just trying to match whatever they were doing. And interestingly, we talk about the size, and so a tiger, a lion and a jaguar mated. There's a place up in Canada, I think it's called Bear Creek, where a lion and a jaguar were living in captivity together. And apparently they loved each other very much. And they had 2 babies, and they produced these jag lions. And these jag lions are not quite as big as the creature we're talking about, but they are really, really close, enormous, and black fur. And so, what's interesting to me is that this creature that we're talking about, this 4-foot tall black cat, is not a genetic impossibility. It's not like something that could never live, or there's no fossil record for it, or there's no hope of it ever being an actual thing. Like pretty easily, with a little bit of breeding and manipulation, we're already achieving results that are close to the type of creature that's being observed out here. And so again, I want to be really clear, like this whole thing is a theory of mine, but what I'm trying to do is make sense of the data that we're receiving. And to me, like, as crazy as it sounds, like it's a totally Stranger Things kind of thing. Like there's a Department of Energy secret site. They're messing around with stuff they should be messing around with. An enormous black creature escapes and starts terrorizing the countryside. Like that's basically Stranger Things in real life right here. And so to me, it's just utterly fascinating. And again, just one of the many, many, many amazing, wondrous, mysterious things that are going on out here. And it's just such a joy to sort of be a ground zero and sort of be the collection point for so many of these just remarkable, like way off the reservation kind of stories, and what appears to me to be very real encounters. I think what makes it believable for me is some of the stories we get are like really, really boring. Like I was driving my ATV and this enormous black cat jumped across the trail and scared the crap out of me, and I never saw it again. Like that's not some kind of complicated story being whisked away in a UFO and traveling the stars. And, like people can have like really complicated stories. But like a lot of our reports are no different than, we were driving to work and we saw a deer on the side of the road. It's that same kind of mundane observation with no, grand tale to tell about it. And, a lot of these people have held on to these stories for decades sometimes and been unwilling to share it for the obvious, concerns of ridicule and whatnot. And here we are, receiving these stories. And from my perspective, I'm 100% certain that there is something out there. and you know exactly what it is. It might be this creature that escaped from the Hanford nuclear site. It may be, well, you know, we talked about that Mashepashu. Well, here in Klickitat County, we have petroglyphs, especially in the desert side of the gorge. There's lots of petroglyphs. These are rock paintings and rock etchings. And one of them is a picture of a cat-like creature with wavy water lines under its head. And so, you know, it could have been something that's been here for, you know, centuries and has been a part of the landscape forever. We really don't know. But again, what a glorious mystery to get to tromp around in and try to figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. And your theory is, I think, as sound and plausible as any. I was ready to sit here and talk about shapeshifters and, you know, getting into experimental, you know, scientific Nazi-esque, you know, animal enhancements are. That's something we haven't covered yet. So I think that theory is awesome. And as far as Ground Zero goes, like, man, I feel like we barely scratched the surface on what you have to offer. I would love if you'd be able to come back on.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's so much to tell. I mean, like you said, we barely scratched the surface on just a handful of the reports. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, with over 300 reports, you know, like the range of things that people have experienced out here is just remarkable. And there's so many places to go with it. You know, so many interesting conversations to have.
Yeah, and you know what? Let's try to figure out how we could get you back on again. Real quick before we finalize everything, I did have a question I was curious about. When people bring this to you, do they remain anonymous, or are you allowed to kind of share their identities when you talk about this kind of stuff?
It runs the gamut. So we always ask people if I can talk about their story. And then I've got some friends who are documentarians. I don't know if you're familiar with a couple of documentaries, Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, and so those guys are good friends of mine. And we've been talking about maybe taping some of these folks who come in. And so I always ask folks, would you be interested in, you know, participating in a documentary? Most folks say yes. But there was a guy who I talked to just yesterday morning who had a really incredible Sasquatch encounter, actually not too far from my house. And he, when he had that experience, he was hunting with his brother. He was 17 at the time. He's now in his 50s. He just gathered up his brother and said, we're leaving. And he wouldn't tell his brother what he had seen. And then it was only 2 years later that he told his brother what he had seen. And his brother told him he was on crack and he was crazy and everything else. And he hasn't talked about it to anybody since then. He definitely didn't want to be, you know, identified with anything that would link back to him. And he definitely didn't want to be in any kind of documentary. But interestingly, you know, this is a grown man, a very skilled hunter and tracker, who refuses, even 30 years later, to go back to the area where he had his Sasquatch encounter. And just remarkable. In a separate experience, though, he reported finding a set of 9 footprints that had a 6-foot stride and 20 to 22 inch feet. And so, like I said, it's remarkable to me. Of course, I can only tell your listeners and tell you that these people are believable. And I could be full of crap too. You know, like I'm just a random guy who showed up on your show. But for me, like the way that these people are, the genuineness of their stories and the way that they talk about it, and oftentimes their unwillingness to be associated with this story, or to, you know, have their name associated with or be in any kind of public presentation of it, to me lends to the veracity of it. These are not people in it for glory or for money or even to be recognized. They just want someone to hear their story and believe them. And he said he thinks about it every day. And that's something that happened to him when, almost 40 years ago. So it's just remarkable.
Yeah. Well, James, we always like to offer, the last bit of the show to our guests to promote any links or other things that you might have going on. So I would like to go ahead and give you the opportunity now to go ahead and speak on that. And we do always include them in our show notes and everything. But if there's anybody listening that can just grab a link real quick,
Sure.
Floor is yours.
Yeah. So margiesoutdoorstore.com, Margie's with an S at the end, outdoor store, or even Margie's Outdoor will get you there.com. We've got our paranormal report form in a digital form there, and some information about some of the creatures and encounters that people have experienced. Mostly, I want to talk to anyone who's in the Gorge area who lives in Washington or Oregon. If you have had an unusual experience, please come down to the store. Please check out our website and file a report. We love to hear about it. We're just on the verge of starting up a Gorge paranormal group here, so that more people can talk about it, and we can start to get some of the data in a more organized and presentable fashion. Maybe more useful to other researchers. Of course, Margie's Outdoor Store is on Facebook. We're on YouTube. We have a few things, like I've got some self-guided tours of a couple of hotspots, but we don't sell those online, and they're really only applicable to someone who's actually in the gorge as a sort of guides to some of those areas and some maps and things like that. But I would encourage anyone who is interested in the paranormal to put the gorge on your list of places to visit. And come to our store in Bingen, Washington. We'll point you in the direction of where the cool stuff is, and give you a sense of where the magic's at. So, yeah, check us out.
Go find the magic.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you again for being on the show. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed, especially the Panther talk.
Yeah.
We will definitely have you back on again. And
Awesome.
Anybody listening, check out his links and definitely visit the gorge. And we'll go ahead and hit the outro, and we'll talk to you for a brief second after the show.
Awesome.
All right. Okay, everybody. We'll see you next week. Thanks for squatching, everybody.
Squatch